Marcus Chen stood at his father's graveside on a cold November morning, watching as the casket was lowered into the ground. He was 26 years old. 5 years had passed since that hospital room reconciliation, 5 years of rebuilt trust and Sunday phone calls and holidays spent together. 5 years of being the son his father always hoped he'd become. Raymond had died peacefully in his sleep, his heart finally giving out after years of careful management, and Marcus had been grateful for every single day they'd had together. He thought that chapter of his life was closed, that the hard part was over. He was wrong. What Marcus didn't know, standing there in that cemetery with his wife Lisa holding his hand and his 2-year-old daughter Claire fidgeting in his arms, was that his father's death would open a door he could never close. A door to a version of himself that would make everything he built, everything he'd become, feel like it was built on sand. This isn't a story about grief. It's a story about what we inherit from the dead, and what we become when we try to honor their memory by destroying ourselves. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus had built a quiet life after returning from Denver. He'd moved back to Cedar Falls, taken a management position at a small restaurant downtown, married Lisa 2 years after the hospital reunion, and settled into the kind of steady existence his father had always wanted for him. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. Claire had been born a year into their marriage, and Marcus found that fatherhood suited him in ways he never expected. He was present. He was there for bedtime stories and diaper changes and first steps. He was everything his father had been, but with the benefit of having learned from Raymond's mistakes. He worked hard, but he came home. He provided, but he didn't disappear into his job. Lisa would sometimes catch him watching Claire sleep and ask what he was thinking. Marcus would say he was thinking about how lucky he was, and he meant it. This was enough. This was everything. Or so he told himself. The week after Raymond's funeral, Marcus and his brother Daniel spent 3 days clearing out their father's house. It was harder than Marcus expected. Every drawer held memories. Every closet contained ghosts. Raymond hadn't accumulated much in his 74 years, mostly practical items, work clothes, a few books, photographs in frames. But in the attic, tucked behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns, Daniel found something that stopped them both cold. It was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with Marcus's name carved into the lid. Inside the box was a thick manila envelope, sealed with wax, and a letter in Raymond's handwriting. The letter was dated 3 months before his death. Daniel looked at Marcus and said, "Did you know about this?" Marcus shook his head. His hands were trembling as he broke the seal and began to read. What he found inside that envelope would change the trajectory of his entire life, though he wouldn't understand the full cost for another 10 years. The letter was written in Raymond's careful, measured handwriting. It started with an apology. Raymond wrote that he'd kept a secret from his sons, not out of shame, but out of protection. 23 years earlier, before Marcus was born, Raymond had been approached by a college friend named David Park who was starting a technology company. David needed investors but had no money, so he offered Raymond something else, a percentage of the company in exchange for contributing the initial concept. Raymond had been working on a factory floor automation system in his spare time, detailed blueprints and processes he'd developed while working at John Deere. He'd never intended to do anything with it, just liked solving problems. David had convinced him to contribute the designs, and in return, Raymond received 30% ownership of the new company. Raymond had signed the papers, handed over his work, and then returned to his life at the factory. He'd thought nothing of it for years. But the company, now called Tech Flow Solutions, had grown into something worth real money. The documents in the envelope showed that Marcus now owned those shares. Raymond had transferred them into Marcus's name 5 years ago, right after the hospital reconciliation. They were worth approximately $43 million. Marcus sat on the attic floor, reading and rereading the letter, trying to process what this meant. Raymond explained that he'd never touched the money because he didn't want to change who he was, didn't want wealth to corrupt the simple life he'd built. But he wanted his sons to have choices he never had. Daniel would inherit the house and Raymond's savings. Marcus would inherit the shares. There was a catch, though, and Raymond's letter made it clear. The other founders of TechFlow Solutions, including David Park, had been trying for years to buy Raymond out, claiming he'd never legally contributed anything substantial enough to warrant his ownership percentage. They'd sent lawyers, made offers, implied threats. Raymond had refused every time. Now that he was gone, Raymond wrote, they would come for Marcus. They would try to intimidate him, to pressure him into selling for pennies on the dollar, or to surrender the shares entirely. The letter ended with these words, Marcus, you can walk away from this. You can sell the shares for whatever they offer and live comfortably. No one would blame you. But if you fight for what's yours, you need to understand something. These men play a different game than anything you've known. They will test you. They will push you. And you'll have to push back harder. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. Marcus showed the letter to Lisa that night. They sat at their kitchen table after putting Claire to bed, and Lisa read it 3 times before saying anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. She asked what he wanted to do. Marcus said he didn't know. $43 million was an impossible amount of money. It could change everything. Claire's education, their future, the restaurant he'd always dreamed of opening. But it also felt dangerous, like something that would pull him into a world he'd never wanted to be part of. Lisa reached across the table and took his hand. She said, your father left you a gift, but he also left you a choice. We're doing okay, Marcus. We have enough. If this feels wrong, we can walk away. Marcus nodded, but something in him had already shifted. He kept thinking about his father, working at that factory for 23 years, walking past those same machines every day while sitting on a fortune he refused to touch. What had that cost him? What had that pride or fear or whatever it was taken from all of them? Marcus kissed Lisa and told her he needed time to think. But he already knew what he was going to do. The lawyers arrived 6 days later. 2 men in expensive suits showed up at the restaurant where Marcus worked, asked to speak with him privately. They were polite, professional, but there was an edge to their courtesy that made Marcus uneasy. They represented TechFlow Solutions. They were sorry for his loss. They understood this was a difficult time. But there were some matters regarding Mr. Raymond Chen's estate that needed to be resolved. Marcus listened as they explained their position. Raymond's original contribution to the company had been minimal, they claimed. The automation system he'd provided was never actually implemented. His 30% ownership was a courtesy, a gesture to a friend, not a reflection of actual value contributed. The company had grown due to the efforts of the other founders. They were prepared to offer Marcus $2 million for his shares. They called it generous. Marcus called it insulting. When he refused, their politeness cooled considerably. One of them, the older attorney with graying temples, leaned forward and said, Mr. Chen, your father was a simple man who understood his limitations. We hope you'll be wiser than he was. Protracted litigation is expensive, stressful, and rarely ends the way you hope. Take the offer. Move on with your life. If this story has your heart racing, comment I'm still watching. Marcus hired his own attorney, a woman named Elena Rodriguez who came recommended by a business professor Daniel knew from Iowa State. Elena was 42, sharply dressed, and didn't waste words. She reviewed the documents Marcus provided and told him he had a case, but it wouldn't be easy. TechFlow's lawyers would drag this out, bury him in paperwork, try to exhaust his resources. She asked him how much he was willing to spend to fight this. Marcus said whatever it takes. Elena raised an eyebrow. She said most people say that, but they don't mean it. Fighting a corporation like TechFlow could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, take years, and still might not succeed. Was Marcus prepared for that? Marcus thought about his father, about the hospital room 5 years ago, about the letter in the attic. He said yes. Elena nodded slowly. Then she said something that would stick with Marcus for years to come. She said, "Good. Because if you're going to fight them, you can't just match their energy. You have to exceed it. You have to be willing to do what they won't expect. Are you that person, Mr. Chen?" Marcus wasn't sure. But he said yes anyway. The legal battle consumed the next 8 months of Marcus's life. Depositions, document requests, conference calls with Elena, who billed $350 an hour. Lisa was supportive, but Marcus could see the worry in her eyes when another invoice arrived, when he stayed up past midnight reviewing files, when he snapped at her over small things because the stress was eating him alive. He'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to pay Elena's retainer. Their savings were draining. And TechFlow's lawyers seemed to have unlimited resources, filing motion after motion, delaying, obstructing, grinding Marcus down. 9 months in, Elena told Marcus they had a problem. TechFlow had found a witness, someone who claimed Raymond's automation system had been based on stolen designs from John Deere. If that testimony held up, Marcus's case would collapse. Elena said they could depose the witness, try to poke holes in the story, but it was risky. Marcus asked who the witness was. Elena told him it was someone Raymond had worked with, a former supervisor. Marcus recognized the name. He'd met the man once, years ago. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Lisa breathing softly beside him, and something dark unfurled in his chest. Marcus did something he'd never done before. He hired a private investigator. Not through Elena, this was off the books. The investigator, a former police detective named Frank Miller, found what Marcus needed in less than a week. The witness, Raymond's old supervisor, had significant gambling debts. More interesting, he'd received a $40,000 payment from an LLC 3 weeks before agreeing to testify. It took Frank 2 more days to trace the LLC back to a subsidiary of TechFlow Solutions. They'd bought his testimony. Marcus sat in his car in the restaurant parking lot, reading Frank's report, and felt something shift inside him. This was what Elena had meant. This was the game. TechFlow had assumed Marcus was like his father, principled, naive, someone who would play by rules while they bent every one. They were wrong. Marcus called Elena and told her what he'd found. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked how he'd obtained the information. Marcus said it didn't matter. Elena said it absolutely mattered. If they presented evidence obtained through questionable means, the judge could throw out their case entirely. But, Elena continued slowly, if someone were to anonymously leak that information to a journalist covering corporate malfeasance, well, that would be out of their hands. Marcus made the call. He sent Frank's report to a business journalist at a Denver newspaper, someone who'd written critical pieces about TechFlow in the past. The story ran 4 days later. TechFlow Solutions was paying witnesses in ongoing litigation. The article didn't name Marcus's case specifically, but it didn't have to. Within 48 hours, the witness recanted his testimony. Within a week, TechFlow's lawyers reached out about settlement. They offered $15 million. Marcus countered with $35. They settled at $28 million plus Marcus retained his full 30% ownership of shares. Marcus had won. But standing in Elena's office, signing the settlement agreement, he didn't feel victorious. He felt different. Changed. Like he'd crossed a line he couldn't see but could definitely feel. Elena shook his hand and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Chen. You're a very wealthy man." Marcus thanked her, paid her final invoice, and drove home in silence. That night, he told Lisa they'd won. She cried with relief, held him, told him how proud she was. Marcus held her back and said nothing about the private investigator, the leaked documents, the decision to fight dirty. He told himself it didn't matter. He'd only done what was necessary. But it was the first secret he'd kept from her since they married. 2 years passed. Marcus was 28 years old and wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined. After taxes and legal fees, he'd walked away with approximately $19 million in cash from the settlement, plus he still owned 30% of TechFlow. The company continued to grow, and his shares appreciated. By his 29th birthday, Marcus's net worth had crossed $50 million. He and Lisa moved from Cedar Falls to Denver, bought a house in Cherry Creek, enrolled Claire in a private preschool. Marcus told himself he was doing this for his family, giving them opportunities he'd never had. But the truth was more complicated. He'd discovered something during that legal battle, something that excited and frightened him in equal measure. He was good at this. Good at strategy, at reading people, at knowing when to push and when to wait. Business, real business, the kind that happened in boardrooms and lawyers' offices, felt like a game he'd been born to play. And he wanted to keep playing. Marcus started investing. First cautiously, then more aggressively. He bought a struggling restaurant in Denver, restructured it, made it profitable. Then another. Then 3 more. He invested in commercial real estate, in tech startups, in anything that showed promise. He hired advisors, built a team, learned everything he could about private equity and venture capital. People started calling him for advice, for money, for partnerships. By the time Marcus turned 30, he was managing a portfolio worth over $100 million. He'd become someone. Someone who mattered. Someone people returned calls to, someone whose name meant something. It was intoxicating. But it was also consuming him in ways he didn't want to acknowledge. He worked 12, 14, 16-hour days. He missed Claire's 5th birthday party because of a deal closing in San Francisco. He forgot his wedding anniversary because he'd been in back-to-back meetings. Lisa started making comments, gentle at first, then sharper. She'd say things like, "Claire asked why Daddy doesn't live here anymore," or, "When was the last time we had dinner together?" Marcus would apologize, promise to do better, and then another opportunity would present itself and he'd break that promise. The moment that should have woken him up came on a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was 31. He was in a conference room evaluating an investment opportunity, a small chain of family restaurants that was struggling financially. The owner, a man named Tom Brennan who was about Raymond's age, sat across the table looking desperate. He'd built these restaurants over 30 years, but competition and changing markets had crushed him. He needed capital. Marcus's team had done the analysis. The restaurants could be profitable again, but only with significant restructuring. Marcus made his offer. He would invest $2 million, but he'd take 80% ownership. Tom would stay on as a manager, but he'd lose control of the company he'd built. Tom's hands shook as he read the term sheet. He looked up at Marcus and said, "I built this with my own hands. These restaurants are my legacy. 80% means I'm working for you." Marcus kept his voice neutral. He said this was a business decision, not personal. The restaurants were underwater. This was the only way to save them. Tom could accept the deal, or he could close everything and lose it all. Tom asked if there was any room for negotiation. Marcus said no. This was his final offer. Tom signed. Marcus shook his hand, told him they'd turn things around together. But as Tom left, Marcus saw something in the older man's face that stayed with him. Defeat. Resignation. The look of someone who'd lost something essential. That night, Marcus went home and poured himself 3 fingers of expensive whiskey. Lisa found him sitting in his study, staring at nothing. She asked if he was okay. Marcus told her about the deal, about Tom Brennan, about the look on the man's face. Lisa sat down across from him and was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question that cut right through him. She said, "Did you give him a fair deal?" Marcus said it was a business deal, fairness didn't really apply. Lisa shook her head. She said, "That's not what I asked. I asked if it was fair. If someone had offered your father that deal, back when he was struggling, would you have thought it was fair?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew the answer was no. He'd structured the deal to maximize his return, to protect his investment, to ensure he had control. He'd given Tom Brennan the same deal TechFlow's lawyers had tried to give him: take what we offer or get nothing. He'd become what he'd hated. Lisa stood up to leave, but at the door she turned back. She said, "You left home at 19 because you didn't want to become your father. You came back because you forgave him. But Marcus, you're not becoming your father. You're becoming something else. Something harder. And I don't know if I recognize you anymore." Marcus told himself Lisa didn't understand business, that she was being emotional, that this was how success worked. But her words haunted him. He started noticing things he'd been too busy to see. Claire was 6 years old and barely knew him. When he came home, she was shy around him, like he was a stranger who happened to live in their house. His relationship with Daniel had deteriorated. His brother called once a month, and their conversations were stiff, formal. Daniel had stayed in Cedar Falls, was teaching high school history, living a modest life. He'd made comments about Marcus's wealth, nothing direct, just enough to make it clear he disapproved of something. Marcus had stopped calling Angela, his old manager from Denver who'd been so kind to him when he was lost. He'd sent her money once, a thank you for everything she'd done. She'd sent it back with a note that said she didn't want his money, she just wanted to know if he was okay. Marcus hadn't responded. He told himself he was too busy. But the truth was he was ashamed. Ashamed of what he'd become, of the distance between who he'd been and who he was now. The deals got bigger. The decisions got harder. The compromises got easier. When Marcus was 33, he had a chance to acquire a regional restaurant chain, 12 locations across Colorado and Wyoming. The company was family-owned, third generation, but the current owners were elderly and their kids didn't want the business. It was a perfect acquisition target. Marcus's team did their due diligence. The numbers worked, but barely. To make the deal profitable, they'd need to close 4 locations and lay off about 200 employees. Marcus sat in his office, looking at the spreadsheet, seeing the numbers that represented people's livelihoods. One of the locations slated for closure was in a small town in Wyoming, population 8,000. The restaurant was probably the largest employer in town. Closing it would devastate the local economy. Marcus's CFO said it was necessary. The location was unprofitable, hemorrhaging money. They couldn't save everyone. Marcus approved the closure. He told himself it was a business decision. He told himself he was being responsible to his investors, to his team, to the overall health of the company. He told himself a lot of things. But that night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his father, about the factory workers Raymond had spent 23 years alongside. About how one decision by someone in a distant boardroom could end everything. 5 years blurred together in a haze of deals, acquisitions, late nights, and early mornings. Marcus barely noticed Claire growing up. She went from 6 to 11 in what felt like a blink. Lisa stopped trying to reach him. She'd built her own life, volunteer work, book clubs, friends. They lived in the same house but occupied different worlds. They still had dinner together occasionally, still maintained appearances, but the intimacy was gone. Marcus told himself it was temporary, that once he reached some undefined level of success he could slow down, reconnect, be present. But that level kept moving. When he hit 100 million in net worth, he thought that would be enough. Then it was 200 million. Then 500. The goalpost kept shifting because the goal was never really about the money. It was about proving something. Proving he mattered. Proving he was more than his father's disappointment. Proving he could build something that would last. But the more he built, the emptier he felt. Success had become its own addiction, and Marcus was chasing a high that kept diminishing. The call that would define everything came on a Thursday morning when Marcus was 37 years old. His net worth had crossed $800 million. He was on the verge of something massive, a deal that would push him past the billion-dollar threshold. A major national restaurant corporation was looking to sell a portfolio of properties, 270 locations across the country. The price tag was substantial, but Marcus had assembled a consortium of investors. If the deal closed, Marcus would own 40% of the new entity. He'd be a billionaire. The press would cover it. Forbes would profile him. He'd have undeniably made it. But there was a problem, and his team was presenting it to him now in his downtown Denver office. To make the numbers work, they'd need to close approximately 60 locations. 3,000 employees would lose their jobs. Marcus looked at the presentation, at the map showing which locations would close. His COO, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, walked him through the logic. Most of the closures were in smaller markets, places where the restaurants were underperforming. It was unfortunate, but necessary. Marcus asked which locations specifically. Jennifer pulled up a detailed list. And there it was, third from the top. Cedar Falls, Iowa. Marcus stared at the screen. The restaurant they'd be closing in Cedar Falls was on 3rd Street, 3 blocks from where his father had worked for 23 years. Some of the employees were people Raymond had known, had talked about, people from the neighborhood Marcus had grown up in. Marcus asked Jennifer what the impact would be on Cedar Falls specifically. She pulled up more data. The restaurant employed 42 people. For a town of Cedar Falls' size, that was significant. But the location was consistently unprofitable. In purely financial terms, it was an obvious closure. Marcus asked if there was any scenario where they could keep it open. Jennifer shook her head. Not if they wanted the deal to be profitable. The margins were thin enough as it was. They needed these closures to make the numbers work. Marcus dismissed the team, told them he needed time to think. He sat alone in his office for 3 hours, looking out at the Denver skyline, thinking about his father, about the path that had brought him here. He thought about that 19-year-old kid in a gas station parking lot, running from a life he didn't want. He thought about the hospital room, his father's tears, the reconciliation that had felt like the beginning of healing. And he thought about what Raymond had written in that letter. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. That evening, Marcus drove home early for the first time in months. Lisa was surprised to see him. They had dinner together, just the two of them. Claire was at a friend's house for a sleepover. Marcus told Lisa about the deal, about the closures, about Cedar Falls. He told her everything he'd been carrying, all the decisions he'd made, all the compromises, all the lines he'd crossed. Lisa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. She asked him what he wanted to do. Marcus said he didn't know. If he walked away from this deal, he'd disappoint his investors, damage his reputation, possibly never get another opportunity like this. But if he closed those restaurants, including the one in Cedar Falls, he'd be doing exactly what he'd feared someone would do to his father. He'd be the person in the boardroom making decisions that destroyed lives. Lisa squeezed his hand. She said, Marcus, I've watched you build this empire for 10 years. I've watched you sacrifice everything for it. Our marriage. Your relationship with Claire. Your health. Your peace of mind. And I've never said you should stop because I thought this was what you wanted. But I need to ask you something now, and I need you to be honest. When you close your eyes at night, when you're alone with yourself, are you happy? Marcus couldn't answer. He realized he hadn't been happy in years. Successful, yes. Wealthy, absolutely. Respected, feared, influential, all of those things. But happy? He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuinely at peace. Lisa continued. She said, "Your father spent his whole life working at a factory, doing the same thing every day, and you resented him for it. You thought he was wasting his potential, playing it safe, not reaching for more. But Marcus, he came home every night. He had dinner with you and Daniel. He was there for your baseball games, for your school plays, for the moments that mattered. He worked hard, but he didn't sacrifice his life for his work. You're doing the opposite. You're building this massive empire, but you're losing everything that actually matters. And I don't think you even see it anymore." Marcus felt something crack open inside him. He asked Lisa if she was leaving him. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. She said she'd been asking herself that question for 2 years. She loved him, but she didn't know who he was anymore. The man she'd married, the one who'd come back from Denver and fought to rebuild his relationship with his father, that man had slowly disappeared. She said, "I don't need you to be poor, Marcus. I don't need you to give up success. But I need you to be present. I need you to be a father to Claire. I need you to be my husband, not just someone I share a house with. And I need you to decide if that's something you even want anymore." Marcus didn't sleep that night. He went to his study, poured whiskey he didn't drink, and sat in the dark thinking. At 3 in the morning, he got in his car and drove. He didn't decide where he was going until he was already on I-80 heading east. 5 hours later, he pulled into Cedar Falls as the sun was rising. He drove past his old high school, past the house where he'd grown up, now occupied by a young family with toys in the yard. He drove past the restaurant on 3rd Street that his deal would close. It wasn't open yet, but he could see movement inside, early morning staff preparing for the day. He drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. Raymond's grave was simple, just a headstone with his name and dates and a line that Daniel had chosen, "Beloved father and friend." Marcus sat on the ground beside the grave, exhausted, empty, lost. He talked to his father the way he'd never been able to when Raymond was alive. He told him about the deals, the money, the success that felt like failure. He told him about Lisa's question, about Claire who barely knew him, about the decision he had to make. He said, "Dad, I don't know what to do. You left me this gift, and I thought I was honoring you by building something with it. But I think I've built the wrong thing. Or I've built it the wrong way. And I don't know how to fix it." Marcus stayed at the cemetery for hours. When he finally drove back to Denver, it was evening. He didn't go home. He went to his office. His team was surprised to see him. He called an emergency meeting, brought in his key advisors, his lawyers, his investors. He told them he was restructuring the deal. They'd still pursue the acquisition, but they'd do it differently. They'd keep 30 of the 60 planned closures, targeting only locations that were genuinely unsalvageable. They'd invest in turning around the others, even if it meant lower profit margins. They'd keep Cedar Falls open. The numbers would be tighter. The return would be smaller. Marcus would still cross $1 billion in net worth, but barely. His investors weren't happy. One of them, a venture capital partner Marcus had worked with for years, said this was a mistake. They had a fiduciary responsibility to maximize returns. Sentiment didn't belong in business decisions. Marcus looked at him and said something he'd never said before in a business context. He said, "I'm the majority partner in this consortium. This is my decision. If you don't like it, you can exit the deal." Half his investors stayed. Half walked away. The deal got smaller, less impressive, less newsworthy. But it closed. And Marcus kept the restaurant in Cedar Falls open. The changes didn't stop there. Over the next 6 months, Marcus restructured his entire approach. He sold off some of his more aggressive holdings, businesses he'd acquired purely for profit without regard for impact. He brought on a COO with a mandate to implement ethical business practices, even when they reduced margins. He cut his own hours, forced himself to leave the office by 6, to be home for dinner with Lisa and Claire. It was awkward at first. Claire was 11 years old and didn't know how to talk to him. She'd built a life that didn't include him, and he couldn't just walk back into it. But Marcus tried. He showed up for her soccer games, even when he didn't understand the rules. He helped with homework, even when she clearly didn't need his help. He was there, consistently, persistently, trying to earn back a place in her life. Lisa watched him carefully, skeptical at first, waiting for him to revert. But months passed and Marcus kept showing up. One night, about 8 months after his decision to restructure the deal, Lisa found him in the kitchen making Claire's school lunch. She stood in the doorway watching him. When Marcus noticed her, she was crying. He asked what was wrong. Lisa shook her head and said, "Nothing's wrong. I just realized I haven't seen you make a school lunch in 6 years. And it made me remember why I married you." The relationship with Claire took longer to repair. She was cautious around him, testing whether this version of her father would last. Marcus didn't blame her. He'd let her down repeatedly, missed recitals and birthdays and ordinary days that mattered more than he'd understood. Now he was asking her to trust him again, and trust had to be earned. One afternoon when Claire was 12, Marcus picked her up from school. Usually she was quiet on the drive home, headphones in, scrolling through her phone. But this day she suddenly asked, "Why are you different now?" Marcus was so surprised he almost missed a turn. He asked what she meant. Claire said, "You used to never be around. Now you're always around. Did something happen?" Marcus thought about how to answer. He could give her a simple explanation, tell her he'd realized work wasn't as important as family. But Claire was 12, nearly a teenager, and she deserved more than a platitude. So Marcus told her the truth. He told her about his father, about leaving home at 19, about the reconciliation in the hospital room. He told her about the inheritance, the legal battle, the deals that consumed him. And he told her about the choice he'd faced with the Cedar Falls restaurant, about realizing he was becoming someone his own father wouldn't have recognized. Claire listened quietly. When Marcus finished, she said, "So you chose us?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. He said, "I'm trying to. Every day, I'm trying to." Marcus was 39 when he received a letter from Angela Rivera, his old manager from Denver who he hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years. She'd found his business address somehow, sent a handwritten note to his office. The letter was short. Angela wrote that she'd seen an article about him in a business magazine, had recognized his name and face. She said she'd wondered over the years what happened to the quiet kid who used to bus tables at her restaurant, the one who seemed so lost. She said she was proud of who he'd become, but she hoped he was taking care of himself. She wrote, "Success is meaningless if you lose yourself getting there. I hope you know that." The letter ended with her phone number and an invitation to call if he ever wanted to talk. Marcus held the letter for a long time, remembering the night Angela had asked him if he was running from something or toward something. He'd said he didn't know. Now, almost 20 years later, he still wasn't entirely sure. But he picked up the phone and called. Angela answered on the second ring. They talked for 2 hours, catching up on years, filling in gaps. Angela told him about her daughter Sophia, now in college. She told him about the restaurant, which she'd sold 3 years ago to retire. She asked Marcus about his life, his family, his father. Marcus told her everything, the whole messy truth of it. When he finished, Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I remember most about you? You were always so afraid of becoming your father. And you did everything you could to be different. But Marcus, your father was a good man. Maybe the lesson wasn't to be different from him. Maybe it was to be the best parts of him." Marcus thought about that conversation for weeks. If this story has your heart racing, comment "I'm still watching." 5 years passed. Marcus turned 44. His net worth had stabilized around $1.2 billion, not the massive fortune he'd once envisioned, but more than he'd ever need. His business portfolio was smaller, more focused, more ethical. He still worked hard, but differently. He delegated more, trusted his team, accepted that not every opportunity needed to be pursued. He and Lisa had rebuilt their marriage slowly, painfully, honestly. They'd gone to counseling, had difficult conversations, learned how to be partners again instead of strangers sharing a house. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds had scarred over but never fully healed. But they were together, genuinely together, in a way they hadn't been for years. Claire was 17, preparing for college, and while their relationship would never be what it might have been if he'd been present all along, it was real. She talked to him, trusted him, even came to him for advice sometimes. Marcus treasured those moments like nothing else in his life. One Sunday morning, Marcus drove to Cedar Falls alone. He did this once a month now, a ritual he'd developed over the past few years. He'd visit his father's grave, spend an hour talking to Raymond about his life, his choices, his struggles. Then he'd drive past the old house, past the restaurant on 3rd Street that he'd fought to keep open, past all the landmarks of his childhood. This particular morning, he stopped at the restaurant. It was busy, the Sunday breakfast rush in full swing. Marcus went inside, sat at the counter, ordered coffee. The server, a young woman probably in her early 20s, didn't recognize him. Why would she? He was just another customer. Marcus watched the restaurant operate, watched families in booths sharing meals, watched elderly couples who'd probably been coming here for decades sitting in their usual spots. This place was woven into the fabric of the community. If he'd closed it 5 years ago, this wouldn't exist. These moments, these connections, would have been erased for the sake of his profit margin. The thought made him feel sick and grateful in equal measure. Sick at how close he'd come to making that choice. Grateful he'd pulled back. As Marcus paid his bill and left, he noticed something. In the corner booth sat an older man with 2 young kids, probably grandchildren. The man was showing them something on his phone, and all 3 were laughing. Marcus recognized him. Tom Brennan, the restaurant owner he'd strong-armed into a deal 9 years ago, the man he'd taken 80% ownership from. Tom looked up, caught Marcus's eye. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Tom's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Tom stood, walked over. Marcus braced himself for anger, for accusation. But Tom extended his hand. He said, "Marcus Chen, right? I heard you were the one who kept this place open when that big deal went through. A lot of people in this town are grateful for that." Marcus shook his hand, unsure what to say. Tom continued, "You know, 5 years ago I would have crossed the street to avoid you. The deal you gave me on my restaurants, that nearly destroyed me. I was angry for a long time." Marcus said, "I'm sorry. That deal was," Tom held up a hand. "Let me finish. I was angry. But then I watched what you did with those restaurants. You turned them around, made them profitable, kept people employed. And I saw other deals you've done since, heard how you've changed your approach. People talk in small business circles." Tom paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "What you did to me wasn't right. But who you've become since then, that seems like someone trying to do better. I respect that." Tom returned to his booth, leaving Marcus standing there processing what had just been said. Not forgiveness, exactly. But acknowledgement. Recognition that change was possible, that people could grow. Marcus drove back to Denver in silence, thinking about Tom's words, about the strange path his life had taken. He'd left home at 19 running from his father's shadow. He'd returned at 21, broken and lost. He'd been given an inheritance at 26 that should have been a blessing but became something darker. He'd spent 10 years building an empire by compromising every value he thought he held. And then he'd made a choice, one choice, to value something other than maximum profit. That choice hadn't fixed everything. It hadn't erased the damage he'd done, the people he'd hurt, the years he'd lost with his family. But it had been a beginning. A different path. Marcus thought about what Angela had said, about being the best parts of his father. Raymond had been a man who worked hard, who provided for his family, but who never let work consume him entirely. He'd been present for the moments that mattered. He'd chosen a simple life and found meaning in it. Marcus had chosen a complex life, built something vast, and nearly lost himself in the process. The reconciliation wasn't in choosing one path over the other. It was in learning when to stop building before you destroyed what you'd already built. When Marcus got home that evening, Lisa and Claire were in the kitchen baking cookies, flour everywhere, laughing about something. Marcus stood in the doorway watching them, and Claire looked up and said, "Dad, you're just in time. Mom's trying to convince me her recipe is better than Grandma's was. Tell her she's wrong." Marcus smiled. He remembered his mother, vaguely, a warm presence from early childhood. He remembered his father in the kitchen on rare occasions, attempting to bake. He stepped forward and said, "I have no idea whose recipe is better, but I'm willing to be a taste tester." He rolled up his sleeves and joined them, getting flour on his expensive suit, not caring. Lisa caught his eye and smiled, a real smile, the kind she used to give him years ago. Later, after Claire had gone to bed and they were cleaning up the kitchen, Lisa said quietly, "You know what I realized today? This is the first Sunday in maybe a decade that you've been home all day, not working, not on calls, just here. It felt normal. Like this is just what Sundays are." Marcus dried a bowl, set it in the cabinet. He said, "I'm sorry it took so long to get here." Lisa leaned against him. "You're here now. That's what matters." The following week, Marcus received a call from a reporter at Forbes. They wanted to interview him for a profile piece, something about successful entrepreneurs who'd pivoted their business models toward more sustainable practices. Marcus almost declined. He'd spent years seeking this kind of recognition, wanting to be featured, to be seen. Now it felt hollow. But his PR team convinced him it was good for business, and Marcus agreed to a brief interview. The reporter, a sharp woman in her 30s named Jennifer Walsh, came to his office. She asked intelligent questions about his business philosophy, his approach to growth, his decision-making process. Then she asked something unexpected. She said, "You're worth over $1 billion, but everything I've read suggests you've deliberately passed on deals that would have made you significantly wealthier. Most people in your position are always reaching for more. Why aren't you?" Marcus thought about how to answer. He could give her a polished response about sustainable business practices and stakeholder responsibility. But something about the question, the directness of it, made him want to be honest. Marcus told Jennifer about his father. About the factory, the inheritance, the legal battle, the years of building an empire at the expense of everything else. He told her about the deal that would have made him substantially richer but would have closed restaurants in small towns, including one in his hometown. He told her about standing in his father's cemetery at 3 a.m, about the choice he'd made, about restructuring his life around something other than maximum profit. Jennifer took notes furiously. When Marcus finished, she looked up and said, "That's not the story I expected. Most people in your position talk about work-life balance and sustainability, but it's usually corporate speak. What you're describing sounds like an actual crisis of conscience." Marcus nodded. He said, "I think we tell ourselves we're building for our families, for the future, for security. But somewhere along the way, the building becomes the point. You forget why you started. You forget who you were before you were successful. And if you're not careful, you become someone you wouldn't have liked before you had money." Jennifer asked if she could quote him on that. Marcus said yes. The article ran 3 weeks later. The headline was, "The Billionaire Who Walked Away, Marcus Chen and the Cost of Success." The Forbes article changed something. Marcus started receiving emails from other business leaders, people in similar positions, telling him they resonated with his story. Some admitted they were struggling with the same tensions, the same questions about what they were building and why. A few asked for advice. Marcus was surprised to find himself becoming a kind of reluctant mentor to other executives who were questioning their paths. He'd never intended to be someone who spoke publicly about these issues. But the response to the article made him realize how many people were fighting the same battle he'd fought, trying to balance ambition with meaning, success with presence. He started speaking at business conferences occasionally, always uncomfortable with the attention but feeling obligated to share what he'd learned. His message was simple: success is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You can win in business and lose in life. The metrics that matter in a boardroom don't matter at a dinner table. Choose carefully what you sacrifice to get what you want, because you can't buy it back later. Marcus was 46 when Daniel called him with news that hit like a punch to the chest. Daniel's voice was shaky, almost apologetic. He said he'd been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He was 50 years old. The doctor said he had a few years before symptoms would seriously progress, but the diagnosis was definitive. Marcus felt the world tilt. Daniel, his older brother who'd always been the steady one, the reliable one, was facing a disease that would slowly erase him. Marcus drove to Cedar Falls the next day. He and Daniel had repaired their relationship slowly over the years, regular phone calls, occasional visits, but there was still distance between them. The wealth that Marcus had accumulated had created a barrier neither of them quite knew how to navigate. But now, sitting across from his brother in the same house they'd grown up in, all of that fell away. Daniel looked tired, scared, trying to be brave. Marcus asked what he could do. Daniel shook his head. He said there wasn't much anyone could do. But then he said something that stayed with Marcus forever. He said, "You know what I kept thinking when the doctor told me? I kept thinking about how Dad died. He went peacefully, in his sleep, at 74. He had a good life. Simple, but good. And I realized I've had that too. I've taught history for 25 years. I've watched hundreds of kids graduate. I don't have your money or your success, but I've been present for my life. And that feels like enough." Marcus spent the next 3 days with Daniel, talking about everything they'd never talked about. Their mother, who died when they were children. Their father, the complicated man who'd tried his best. The years Marcus was gone, how Daniel had felt abandoned. The years after Marcus returned, how Daniel had resented the wealth, the transformation, the person Marcus had become. They talked about childhood memories, about stupid things they'd done as kids, about the simple fact that they were brothers and that mattered more than anything else. On Marcus's last evening there, they drove to their father's grave together. They stood side by side in the cemetery, two middle-aged men saying goodbye to their father again, preparing to say goodbye to each other too soon. Daniel said, "Dad left you money. He left me this house and his tools and his books. I used to think that was unfair, that he loved you more. But I realize now he gave us each what he thought we needed. You needed a push toward something bigger. I needed the reminder that simple things have value." Marcus felt tears on his face. He said, "I would trade everything I have to keep you here longer." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know. But you can't. None of us can buy more time. We can only use what we have better." They stood there as the sun set, two brothers who'd taken completely different paths and somehow ended up in the same place, understanding finally what mattered. The years that followed were bittersweet. Marcus watched Daniel's decline, slow at first, then accelerating. He paid for the best care, the best doctors, anything that might help. None of it changed the outcome, but Marcus did it anyway because doing nothing was unbearable. He visited Cedar Falls twice a month, sat with Daniel even as his brother's memories faded, even as Daniel sometimes forgot who Marcus was. On the good days, Daniel was still there, still sharp. On the bad days, he would look at Marcus like a stranger. But Marcus kept coming. He read to Daniel, shared stories about their childhood, kept their father's memory alive. Lisa and Claire came with him sometimes. Claire, now in college, seemed deeply affected by watching her uncle disappear slowly. She told Marcus once that it made her understand why he'd changed his approach to life, why he'd chosen to be more present. She said, "You can't get time back. Uncle Daniel is teaching me that." Daniel died on a Tuesday morning in spring. He was 53 years old. Marcus was with him at the end, holding his hand, telling him he loved him, receiving no response because Daniel was already gone in all the ways that mattered. At the funeral, Marcus delivered the eulogy. He talked about his brother's life, his dedication to teaching, his quiet goodness. And he talked about the lesson Daniel had taught him without meaning to, that a life's value isn't measured in wealth or achievement, but in presence, in relationships, in the small daily choices to show up for the people you love. Marcus was 49 when he made the decision that would define his final chapter. He called a meeting with his board, his leadership team, everyone who mattered in his business empire. He told them he was stepping back. Not retiring completely, but transitioning to a chairman role, letting his COO take over day-to-day operations. He would stay involved in strategic decisions, but he was done with the 80-hour weeks, the constant travel, the all-consuming focus on growth. His team was supportive, though some seemed confused. He was at the top of his game, his businesses were thriving, why step back now? Marcus didn't try to explain it in business terms. He said simply that he'd built enough, achieved enough, and now he wanted to live the life he'd built rather than constantly building the next thing. He was 50 years old. Claire was graduated from college, starting her career. Lisa was planning to go back to school herself, pursue a degree she'd abandoned when Claire was born. Marcus wanted to be present for these chapters of their lives. He'd missed too much already. The transition was harder than Marcus expected. For 20 years, his identity had been tied to his work, to building, to achieving. Learning to slow down felt like learning to breathe differently. He had to rediscover who he was when he wasn't working, what he enjoyed when he wasn't in a meeting or negotiating a deal. He started simple. Morning coffee with Lisa, unhurried conversations. Cooking dinners instead of eating at his desk. Reading books that weren't about business. Taking walks without his phone. It felt strange, almost wasteful, to have unstructured time. But gradually, Marcus found a rhythm. He reconnected with old friends, people he'd lost touch with during his years of obsessive work. He reached out to Angela again, and they started having regular video calls, just talking about life. He established a foundation in Daniel's name, funding education initiatives in small towns. He visited Claire regularly, but not intrusively, letting her build her own life while knowing he was there if she needed him. And once a month, without fail, Marcus drove to Cedar Falls, visited both his father's grave and Daniel's, and spent time in the town he'd run from at 19 and spent his adult life trying to both escape and honor. On a Saturday morning 6 months after stepping back, Marcus was sitting on his back patio with coffee, watching the sunrise, when Lisa came outside and joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lisa said, "You seem different lately. Lighter somehow." Marcus thought about it. He said, "I think I finally stopped running." Lisa asked what he meant. Marcus tried to put it into words. He said, "I left home at 19 running from my father's life. Then I spent 25 years running toward success, trying to prove I was more than what I came from. And I built this empire, made all this money, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But I was still running, just in a different direction. I think I've finally stopped. I don't need to prove anything anymore. I don't need to be more successful or wealthier or more respected. I just need to be here, with you, with Claire when she wants to see me, with myself. And that's enough." Lisa reached over and took his hand. She said, "It took you a long time to figure that out." Marcus nodded. "Too long. But I got there eventually." Marcus thought often about the letter his father had left him, the one that started everything. Raymond had written, "Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you." For years, Marcus had interpreted that as permission, as his father's blessing to build an empire, to pursue wealth, to become someone significant. But now, reading the letter again at 50 years old, Marcus understood something different. His father hadn't been giving him permission to be successful. He'd been giving him permission to be himself, whatever that meant. Raymond had left Marcus money, but more importantly, he'd left him a choice. And Marcus had chosen, first one path, then another. He'd become wealthy, powerful, influential. He'd also become distant, obsessed, lost. And then he'd chosen again, pulled back, reprioritized, tried to salvage what mattered. The story wasn't about right or wrong choices. It was about learning from them, about course-correcting before it was too late, about understanding that success means nothing if you're alone at the top. The hidden chapter of Marcus Chen's life wasn't his departure at 19, or his reconciliation at 21, or even his rise to billionaire status by 40. The hidden chapter was the internal battle he'd fought for 20 years between the person he wanted to become and the person he was becoming. It was the slow realization that you can win in every measurable way and still lose everything that matters. It was learning that his father's simple life wasn't a limitation to escape but a choice to respect. It was understanding, finally, that coming home wasn't about returning to a place but about returning to values, to presence, to the understanding that we're defined not by what we accumulate but by what we're willing to sacrifice accumulation for. Marcus had built an empire on a secret he should have buried, not the secret of his inheritance, but the secret of his own emptiness, his need to prove worth through wealth, his belief that success would fill the void left by years of feeling insufficient. He should have buried that need, faced it, healed it. Instead, he built on top of it, constructed billions of dollars worth of achievements on top of an unresolved wound. And it had nearly cost him everything. Now, at 50, Marcus understood what his father had tried to teach him in that hospital room 16 years ago. Raymond had asked if Marcus was happy, and Marcus had said he was working on it. Raymond had responded that that's all any of us can do. At the time, Marcus thought his father was talking about the slow process of building a life. But now Marcus understood differently. His father had been saying that happiness isn't a destination, it's a practice. It's the daily choice to be present, to value connection over achievement, to measure success by the relationships you maintain rather than the wealth you accumulate. Raymond had lived that way, chosen that way, and Marcus had thought it was settling. Now he understood it was wisdom. His father had died peacefully because he'd lived intentionally. He'd worked at a factory for 23 years not because he lacked ambition, but because he valued his presence at home more than advancement at work. He'd turned down opportunities, refused promotions that would have required more hours, chosen his family over career progression again and again. And he'd died surrounded by love, with his sons having reconciled with him, having understood him finally. Marcus wanted that too. He wanted to die peacefully someday, having been present for his life, having repaired what he'd broken, having chosen connection over conquest. There's no triumphant ending to this story, no moment where everything resolves perfectly. Marcus didn't give away his wealth or have a dramatic change of heart that erased the past. He remained a billionaire, remained involved in his businesses, remained someone who'd made questionable choices and hurt people in pursuit of success. But he also became someone who acknowledged those choices, who tried to do better, who used his remaining years to be present rather than perpetually building towards some undefined future. He and Lisa rebuilt their marriage into something different than what it had been, mature and complex and real. His relationship with Claire would never be what it might have been if he'd been present from the beginning, but it was genuine, and it was growing. He honored Daniel's memory through his foundation, through telling his brother's story to anyone who would listen, through trying to embody the quiet goodness Daniel had lived. And once a month, Marcus stood at his father's grave and talked to Raymond about life, about choices, about the strange path from that hospital room reconciliation to this moment, about gratitude for the inheritance that was both gift and curse, about understanding finally that his father's real legacy wasn't money but the example of a life lived with values intact. The reporters occasionally still called, wanting to interview the billionaire who'd walked away from even greater wealth, who'd chosen ethics over maximum profit, who spoke openly about the cost of success. Marcus usually declined. He didn't want to be a cautionary tale or an inspiration. He just wanted to be human, flawed and learning in trying. But sometimes, when a young entrepreneur reached out, someone at the beginning of their journey, someone driven and hungry and a little bit lost, Marcus would take the call. He'd listen to their dreams, their plans, their absolute certainty that they could build something massive without sacrificing what mattered. And Marcus would recognize himself at their age, that same hunger, that same blindness. He wouldn't try to talk them out of it. You can't. People have to learn their own lessons. But he'd say something simple, something that might plant a seed they'd remember later when they needed it. He'd say, build your empire if you need to. Chase your success. But understand something before you start. You're going to have to make choices. You're going to have to sacrifice. And you won't realize what you've sacrificed until years later when you try to get it back and discover you can't. So choose carefully. Choose consciously. And check in with yourself regularly about whether what you're building is worth what it's costing. Because the price is always higher than you think. Marcus Chen left home at 19 thinking he needed to escape to find himself. He came back at 21 thinking reconciliation was the end of the journey. Then his father died and left him an inheritance that became both opportunity and trap. Marcus spent the next 20 years building an empire, accumulating wealth, achieving success, and losing himself in the process. He became ruthless, distant, consumed by the game of business until he barely recognized the person he'd become. And then he made a choice, one choice, to value something other than maximum profit. That choice didn't fix everything, but it started him on a different path. A path back to presence, to connection, to the values he'd abandoned in pursuit of achievement. Now, at 50 years old, Marcus understood what he wished someone had told him at 19, success without presence is just sophisticated failure. Wealth without relationship is just expensive loneliness. Achievement without meaning is just exhausting. His father had tried to show him this through his simple life. Daniel had tried to show him this through his quiet dedication. Lisa and Claire had tried to show him through their gradual withdrawal as he became unreachable. But Marcus had to learn it himself, the hard way, by building everything and nearly losing what mattered. This is Marcus Chen's hidden chapter. Not the poverty to riches story. Not the prodigal son's return. Not even the tale of business success. The hidden chapter is the part we don't talk about when we celebrate achievement. It's the marriages that crumble under the weight of ambition. The children who grow up with absent but successful parents. The friendships that fade because there's never time. The health that deteriorates from stress and overwork. The joy that gets postponed indefinitely for some future moment that never quite arrives. The slow transformation from human being into human doing, from someone with a life into someone with a resume. That's the hidden chapter. That's the part that doesn't make it into the Forbes profiles or the success stories or the motivational speeches. And that's the chapter that matters most, because it's where we actually live. Not in our achievements, but in the moments between them. Not in what we build, but in who we become while building it. Marcus built an empire on a secret he should have buried, the secret that he felt insufficient, unloved, invisible. He should have dealt with that wound directly, healed it, made peace with it. Instead, he tried to bury it under layers of success, thinking wealth would prove his worth, thinking achievement would earn him the love and recognition he'd craved since childhood. It didn't work. It never works. But it took him 20 years to understand that. If you are watching this and you're on your own journey toward success, whatever that means to you, remember this: your father, your mother, your children, your partner, they won't remember how much money you made or how many deals you closed or how impressive your achievements were. They'll remember whether you were there. Whether you showed up. Whether you were present for the ordinary moments that make up a life. Marcus spent 20 years chasing extraordinary achievement and nearly lost his ordinary life in the process. He got it back, barely, not because he was special or wise, but because he finally stopped running long enough to see what he was running from and what he was running toward. He stopped in time to make different choices. Not everyone does. Some people run until they're alone at the top, looking down at everything they've achieved and nothing that matters. Don't be that person. Choose carefully what you sacrifice for success, because you can't buy it back later. Marcus learned that lesson the hard way. His father tried to teach it to him gently, through example. But Marcus had to live it himself, had to feel the weight of his choices, had to stand in his mansion feeling completely empty before he understood. Now he spends his days trying to be present, to show up, to value connection over achievement. It's harder than building $1 billion empire. But it's worth more. What about you? Are you building something so big that you're losing yourself in the construction? Are you sacrificing presence for achievement, connection for success, meaning for metrics? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This isn't just Marcus's story, it's the story so many of us are living without realizing it. And if this story made you think about someone you need to call, someone you've been too busy to see, some relationship you've let fade because you were building your empire, do it now. Don't wait. Marcus waited, and he got lucky that he had time to repair things. Not everyone does. Thanks for being here. Your presence, right now, watching this story, taking time to reflect, that matters. That's the choice to be present instead of perpetually chasing the next thing. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, you can build an empire, but don't sacrifice your kingdom to do it.